Let's rock and roll. Well, hey, I would like to welcome a very special guest. He is a craft beer pioneer. Could we say that?
That's fair enough.
Fair enough. All right. A Cleveland Business Hall of Famer. That's without debate. You can go check the Hall of Fame right there. The godfather of craft beer in Ohio. And the reason for my slight hangover earlier this weekend, I got my guy, co-founder of Great Lakes Brewing Company, Pat Conway here. Pat, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks for the invite. Walking through the rainy streets of Cleveland certainly beats snowy streets of Cleveland.
And I'll tell you what, either if it's snow, if it's rain, if it's beautiful, no matter what the temperature is, that day is always heightened by a Great Lakes beer, I would say.
I can't agree more. I think it's perfect. We have beer for every occasion.
Beer for every occasion. We're going to talk about the beer history of Cleveland, the beer history of Great Lakes Brewing Company, the whole deal. But I thought we would start off, I want to know what your first beer was. Or when, do you remember your first beer?
Do you mean at Great Lakes Brewing? Or
ever
just...
for you. Whether that was 21, I'm assuming it had to have been 20. No, probably, was it 18? Was the drinking age 18
for
back?
3.2, right?
Yeah.
I think probably a Stroh's.
Stroh's?
And then they had a product, I'm not even sure if it's still on the planet, but it was called Colt 45.
Oh, Colt 45s are still around. Yeah, I think they only make them in 40s now.
Is that? Ouch.
Not that I would ever really know, but, I live next to kind of I live next to a gas station. I see them in there once in a while, and I've never had the delight of a Colt 45.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit unusual compared to what we're doing today.
Well, especially what you're probably used to. Some of the best beers in not only in Northeast Ohio, but the Great Lakes area and beyond. Award-winning beers with Great Lakes Brewing Company. Starting back in you guys started back in 1988. I believe you first started brewing the process in 1986. But lead me up what led to starting this, because now there's craft breweries all over the place. It's not you could brew beer in your basement if you want to, and people of course do that. But back in that day, that was not necessarily, it wasn't a thing. Especially here in Ohio, because you guys were the first craft brewery. What led you to this concept and making that jump of wanting to get into the craft brewery game?
Well, I think it really started when I went to Loyola University in Chicago, and they had a school in Europe, so a year abroad. It was in Rome, and not that Rome is the hotbed of beer consumption, because it's pretty much still, even today, pretty much a wine culture, but going north over the Alps and visiting Germany and back then Czechoslovakia and Belgium, England, and of course our stop to see family in Ireland, I fell in love with those more fresh, lusty, full-bodied kind of flavors, and I used to think, why do we have this banal-tasting, aggressively carbonated light beers in the United States? Why can't we have this kind of more flavorful product? And came back to the United States, and then when I was in graduate school, I was bartending at night in Chicago, and I was selling a lot of Guinness and Bass and Heineken and Carlsberg, and I was like, boy,
a lot of European beers.
Yeah. And so it suggested to me there's now budding a change in the American palate. Either people are more well-read and more well-traveled, and they're experiencing products from different parts of the world. And so I thought, why not explore getting into this and be in the forefront of this movement? Because, like I was telling Marissa, we are, as a culture, going through what we call the terminal case of the blands. Everything was boring, light, aggressively carbonated beer, jug wine, Wonder Bread. So
it was all just very kind of generic, and it wasn't a lot of the same. It wasn't, and it was also brewed for the masses.
Right, and actually the brewery industry took their cue from vineyards out in California. They had won awards in Europe for their products, and so these boutique vineyards start to spring up, and then pretty soon it went into beer, and then coffees and teas and candies and breads, and here we are now, decades later, and I think our whole culture benefited from this movement because I think it's far more interesting products out in the market than
Sure.
there ever was before.
Like kind of that artisan approach.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Sure, and you guys were doing this as well. You know, not only were you getting into a industry that wasn't necessarily a thing. I mean, at the time in 1986, or the mid 80s, it was probably what, Samuel Adams that was considered a craft beer in Sierra Nevada.
Sierra Nevada, right?
And were those really the only two at the time?
Anchor
Anchor.
Steam out of San Francisco, which closed its door a couple of months ago, to the chagrin of everyone because it was one of the pioneers of the craft beer industry. But when I decided to move back to Cleveland from Chicago, my wife was from Chicago, but we made a point to say, let's move back to Cleveland. And I was telling my brother Dan, who had gone to John Carroll, but he also went to Loyola's school in Europe for a year.
Yeah.
So when I was telling him about this project, he said, it sounds fascinating. He said, so if you need me to help you with your business plan, he was working at a bank here in Cleveland as a loan officer, and so he...
Oh, that's a pretty good guy to know to start a business.
That's right. So we sat down and went over it, and then finally Dan decided to leave the bank and become partners, and so it's been a great relationship over the years. We disagree on things now and then, but I think our core principles align, and so
Yeah.
that's important.
How do you continue? And as I'm talking, I'm going to bring that just a touch closer to my mouth. How do you continue that? Were you nervous getting in business with your brother? I think I'd be nervous of getting into business with my brother because not only, I mean, it's just we get along. He's my best friend. He's my best man at my wedding. But I think there's a difference between a partnership of business, but then when you're adding that to family, like I can talk to my brother way different than I could talk to one of my coworkers. You know, I've gotten into fights with my brothers, little physical fights, you know. But and that is what, you know, that's a brotherly relationship, but you can't bring that into the business world. How have you guys been able to manage the brother relationship, but then also the business partner relationship and have it thrive into a great company?
Well, I know that Dan and I are both 2 of 9 children of our parents, whose parents all came from Ireland, and we've been very close as a family, close-knit family, and now our wives and our children are all see each other frequently throughout the year where there's family reunions, we vacation together, so it's always been a relationship that's been warm and familial, and it's something that is unique because a lot of times people say don't go into business with family,
Yeah.
but this relationship has worked out great, and like I said a couple minutes ago, we just started 2024 on a high note. We had a great fourth quarter last year, and so hopefully some of those post-COVID days are behind us. You know, our company really took it on the chin during COVID because bars and restaurants closed. That
Yeah.
meant our business disappeared.
Yeah.
Good news is that people were buying 6-packs at Heinen's and Giant and going home and entertaining at home, so we benefited from that. But overall, it was
I definitely added
rough.
to the bottom line on that one,
Yeah.
for sure. There was nothing to do during COVID.
That's right.
It's like, 2 p.m. Oh, I think it's time to crack one right now. But, you know, so we're talking that, you know, pioneer of craft beer, getting into this, taking the leap of faith into really an undiscovered career path or industry here, at least in the United States. But then also taking another leap of faith, too, in Cleveland. I mean, this is the mid-'80s. There wasn't a lot going on here in Cleveland. And you guys decide to not only set up shop in Cleveland, but in at the time, very undesirable neighborhood, Ohio City. And now, I mean, it's hard it's weird that coming out of my mouth because it's one of the most desirable cities or areas and neighborhoods in Northeast Ohio. Did people think you were crazy of like, oh, Pat and Dan are starting a beer company and they're going to end up in they're doing it in Ohio City where it's pretty run down and a little rough?
Well, I would say that we had that blind, obsessive, entrepreneurial mindset where, like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it right. And I have a cousin who was a homicide policeman in Cleveland, and he said, I know where the drug lords are. I know where the homicides are, the prostitution, the murder. He said, don't go there. That's a recipe for disaster. And so now when I see him at weddings and funerals, he goes, how did you guys do that? But it was a moribund part of the city. It was, fortunately, we had strong anchors with St. Ignatius to the west and the West Side Market to the east. So those were great institutions that have been around for over 100 years. And so those were two strong bookends, and we occupied the middle ground there. And what we really loved about it was nothing conjures up the romance of brewing days past like red brick buildings. And
Sure.
Our buildings that we occupied, they were boarded up. And we said to the landlord, we'd like to start this concept in your building because you could see through some of the cracks in the boards on the windows that there's this stunningly beautiful tiger mahogany bar, and it was just reeked with history, and we thought this has got to be our address. And we talked to the landlord, and he said, I'm not going to open the doors up. I'm going to wait till the neighborhood changes, and then I'm going to flip this property. And we were like, yeah, but Peter,
You're going to be waiting a while.
Peter, the neighborhood's not going to change until we become the catalyst for the change.
Yeah.
And so he reluctantly leased us the building with 2 5-year options, and somewhere toward the end of the first 5 years, he went bankrupt.
Oh.
So we bought all the property at the sheriff's sale.
Wow. And that is what is now the brew pub.
Right.
At Great Lakes. And what's interesting, too, is that you could just sense that history. You can sense it now walking in there, but you could sense it back then because it was from conversation that we've had prior, it was a prohibition bar, right? Or it was important around the prohibition?
Well, the rumors are that Elliott Ness actually used to drink there.
Yeah.
He was a lot of Politico, a lot of judges found that as a popular watering hole. There's a couple bullet holes scattered around the bar, and some people have associated it with Ness, but my mom, who was his stenographer,
It's interesting.
junior stenographer, she said Ness never carried a gun. So she said, I doubt if that there's truth to that tale, but a lot of those bars operated during Prohibition. In fact, New York City itself had 5,000 speakeasies during the Prohibition.
Wow.
So the initiative was really ridiculous.
It really went quite the opposite way.
Yeah. Well, it encouraged a lot of thugs and underworld folks getting into the business and occupying spirits, not just beer, but bourbon, whiskeys, and a lot of craziness. They called it the noble experiment, but I think in hindsight, everyone realized how crazy that was. It really was counterproductive because the government, by closing down breweries and spirits establishments, they lost a lot of people from being employed, and also they lost a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
So when they repealed Prohibition in 1933, after 13 years of this noble experiment, they realized that they needed to bring these industries back for cash.
Yeah.
Because the Depression had knocked a lot of businesses out of business, and so they needed cash, and this was the rationale behind the change of to end Prohibition. It wasn't so much people being enlightened; it was a dollar and cents issue.
Yeah, and as you say, the noble experiment, but there's so many things that just obviously are just right in your face. First off, just even from a health standpoint, you took regulation away. It's like, did they think that people were just all of a sudden gonna stop drinking? And then obviously, then what you're talking about is the economic standpoint as well. But Cleveland was really a city that was built on beer and breweries, and at that time there was, by the time that Prohibition came around, over 30 breweries.
30 breweries, yeah.
30 breweries. Talk to me about just how important the role that beer played in this city and the in the economy, of the early economy of beer and of Cleveland, and the foundation of Cleveland.
Well, the very first settler and tavern owner in Cleveland was Lorenzo Carter in 1802, and he brought his family to the shores of Lake Erie and Cuyahoga River. They were the only white people in the area. It was mostly Native American occupying settlements around the river.
Yeah.
But by 1950, there was about 30 breweries. All the breweries started out as ales, porters, and stouts because our founding fathers were Anglo-Saxons from Connecticut, who in turn had come from Britain. And so everyone was drinking ales, porters, and stouts, but then with the huge immigration of German population in 1850, people leaving Germany for economic and political reasons came to Cleveland because of industry was starting to boom, and what a ready-made thing for the industry to have all these immigrants come to be the workforce. But when the Germans came, they wanted their lagers.
Yeah.
And so by the turn around 1890, there was no ales, porters, and stouts left. Everything was lagers because
Really?
it was an important part of the German culture. They needed that lager beers for their Sunday afternoons because back then everyone worked pretty much 6 days a week, 15 hours a day, and so Sunday was the day of rest, and the Germans loved their beer gardens, and it was not just beer and food, it was poetry readings, it was bowling, it was ballet, it was book clubs. It was pretty stunning. Now the Irish as a culture didn't have that same kind of broad vision of
the arts of the culture.
Yeah, it was
They
going
just
to the
wore in
bar.
just to get wasted.
You go to the bar, and the bar is where you talk politics, and,
Sure.
and jobs would be posted, and so it was a very different, and it was pretty much male-dominated, whereas the German beer gardens was family-oriented, and a lot of food.
Sure.
So when we opened in 1988, we brought back ales, porters, and stouts and lagers, because Dortmunder and Elliott Ness are both lagers, but I think that our whole company's efforts on that front really helped bring back an appreciation for all the various styles that are out there.
Yeah.
Now our Christmas ale, it's made with ginger, honey, and cinnamon. That's worked for us over the years and continues to grow. But actually, we're just standing on the shoulders of the Sumerian brothers and sisters who brewed 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. They used all kinds of different products for their beer making, like pomegranate and dates and raisins and different herbs and spices. So actually, the Christmas ale is pretty much a return to what the Sumerians have done thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and you can't talk about Great Lakes really or the history of Great Lakes without talking about Christmas ale.
Right.
And I mean, when I moved here, people were talking like it was, the wine that Jesus, turned water into wine, and that's the Christmas ale that everyone served. And the first time I had it, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's unbelievable. I mean, what has that really meant to Great Lakes, your guys' success, and your continued growth?
Well, it's, nationally, the high water mark of beer production is usually in June, July, August, the hot summer months. Actually, the high water mark for Great Lakes Brewing is the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And it's partly because of Oktoberfest, which comes out in the autumn, but also right after that is the Christmas Ale and then Conway. So we probably are known nationally as one of the top seasonal brewers in the country.
Yeah.
And one of the big leaders, of course, in that score is the Christmas Ale. And I think the success of it has to do with the packaging, of course,
Sure.
because it's the old train with the bulbs, ornaments on it harkens back to a very simpler, warm approach to the holidays, but also the ginger, honey, and cinnamon. Not one flavor dominates the other. They all work in tandem together nicely. When we were exploring putting out a Christmas ale, there wasn't a lot out there.
Yeah.
We did taste a couple from California, and one was double. It was very hoppy and a lot of high octane to it, but it didn't taste festive to us, even though it was a well-made beer. And then another one we tried had too much spruce in it. It was didn't resonate with us. So when we decided
That's the Christmas tree ale.
That's right. So we decided to tweak our own recipes or formulas. We came up with what we have today, and we don't change the recipe, the formula. It stays the same. But a lot of people say, this year is the best I've ever had. And it is an agricultural product, so bees and honeys, different honeys, and ginger and cinnamon. Do they slightly change year to year? I guess they do, but.
I asked Mark Hunger about that, and he said, "Yeah, we don't change it. It's pretty streamlined. What people need to base it off of is, first and foremost, the best Christmas ale is at the brew pub. Right. It's the freshest, it's the best.
Clean beer lines.
Clean beer lines. That's what he said is probably the biggest difference of people going to other places and it's not a good beer line. It's an unclean beer line or
dirty beer glasses.
So all of that can kind of lead into it. Yeah, because you guys aren't changing the recipe every year. What a pain that would be.
Well, also if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Exactly.
So, but every year people look forward to it, and there's a lot of celebrations of families and friends that center around the Christmas ale, and we're pleased that we have such a cult following for the product.
Yeah, I would say even bigger than cult.
Oh, well.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a cultural movement in Cleveland. Look at every single brewery in Cleveland, and there's a lot of them. Everyone has a Christmas ale now, where 30, 40 years ago that wasn't even a product.
Yeah, back then when we first came out with it, there was a void across the shelves on Christmas ales, and now, Jesus, there must be hundreds of them.
Yeah.
But ours still stands out as one that it's the preference of not just our local audience, but in Chicago and Pittsburgh and Detroit and Cincinnati, Columbus. It's got a following outside of Cleveland as well.
Sure. And you were talking about it, that the seasonal beers, I think you guys are really unique in that, and because in the summer, you guys have Dortmunder all year round, but then Oktoberfest, or September Oktoberfest, the Christmas ale, the Conways. Was that a deliberate strategy, or did that just kind of come about just because it made sense to have these beers here? But Conway, you could probably sell all year round. Oktoberfest, you could sell all year round. Christmas ale, you could probably sell all year round. But you choose that. Was that a necessary strategy that you guys chose, or a deliberate strategy?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we get efforts every year. I wish this. In fact, I was just talking to Marissa earlier. I think more than ever, we've gotten people saying the Conway's Irish Ale should be all year round. But no, we think that each product might lose its exclusivity if we had it shared 12 months of the year. And so we're pleased. And then there's an excitement when people can hardly wait to see that Oktoberfest come out.
It would definitely lose its luster.
There's a Great Lakes Brewing at Concourse C at the airport, and it's not owned by us, but they use our name, provided they only sell our products and wear our uniforms.
I've been there numerous times.
Well, I was out passing through town. I've forgotten where I was headed, but I stopped in to do some quality control,
some recon. Yeah.
And I said to the bartender, what's anything new? And she said, let me tell you this story. She said a couple of weeks ago, this fellow was coming through town from San Francisco, and he said, what's new? And she said, well, the Great Lakes Brewing just introduced their seasonal Christmas ale. And she said, here, I'll pour you a little sample. And he tried, and he said, well, this is extraordinary. She goes, yeah, it's made with ginger, honey, and cinnamon, and you can only get it for 8 weeks, blah, blah. Well, he was so pumped. And she said, in fact, you can get 6 packs to go because you're already through security. And so he was like, no way. And she goes, well, excuse me, I have to pour a beer. So she poured a beer for a guy, and she came back, and he was gone. And she went, geez, that's surprising, because he looked really excited about the beer. Well, she looked over her shoulder, and here he comes walking down the concourse. He went and bought luggage to put the beer so he could go back to San Francisco with a case or whatever.
He's lugging a keg onto the plane, sir. That you're gonna have to check that bag. That's fantastic, though. But yeah, you've just become such an integral part of the fabric of Cleveland, especially, but really beer drinkers all across the Great Lakes. going back to, I mean, this now it's such a success. It would be hard to think about Cleveland beer or Ohio beer and not think that Great Lakes paved the way for so many people. But back in the early days, you guys were selling beer out of your car, right? Out of your station wagon.
That's right. Yeah, our brother-in-law Mike Grady had an old Chevy station wagon that was long in the tooth, and he gave it to us, or he charged us $1 or whatever. But we used to hand bottle beer one after another, and it took us all day to do 30 cases. Now we'll do 30 cases in
15 minutes,
15 seconds. Yeah. But then,
so you guys were hand bottling these?
yeah, we would have the beer tank right here, and then we'd counter pressure the bottle, and then we'd open this valve and we'd fill it with the beer, and then we'd hand it to this guy, and then Ramon Feliciano would then cap it.
Yeah.
And then someone said, that's an inferior way of packaging. You really need to get that air out of it. So we evolved into where he would counter pressure, fill it, and it'd come up, and then before he capped it, we'd take a screwdriver and hit it, and the bottle would foam. Then we'd put the cap on, and it would purge the air out.
Yeah. Quite the scientific way of going about it.
I mean, that's handcrafted, literally.
Yeah, quite literally handcrafted. So is it safe to say that, I mean, going into this, how much did you really know about beer?
Well,
besides that you liked it.
Well, when I moved back from Chicago and then teamed up with Dan, we're like, okay, now we're not brewers. I had been in bartending and been around beer for years, but never. I tried making it years ago, and it was pretty unsuccessful. But I looked under B in the phone book. Remember phone books?
I do. Yeah, hardly.
And I looked for B for brewers, and there weren't any. So I did see a listing for the Brewers and Soft Drink Union. So I called them, and I said, I'm looking for the breweries. And when I was in Cleveland years ago, before I moved to Chicago, there was Leisey's and there was Standard Brewing Company and Schmidt's. And they said, well, they're all gone. And I went, really? They said, yeah. Schmidt's was the last brewery, and they closed its door a couple years ago. But he said that the brewmaster there, the plant manager, Thane Johnson, lives south of Cleveland in Sagamore Hills. So why don't you talk to him? So I called him and I said, Thane, I want to bring back this brewing tradition in Cleveland, because when you closed your doors a few years ago, that ended 150 straight years of brewing in Cleveland.
Wow.
And we'd like to bring that back, but we'd like to start in a restaurant environment, brew pub environment, where people come to you. You don't have delivery trucks and extensive marketing campaigns and sales force. And he said, I'd love to be part of that, but he said, I've been brewing for 40 years and I don't want to invest my life savings into something like this, because breweries close every other day and restaurants close by the minute. But he said, you can hire him as a consultant. So we hired him as a consultant, and we started to go around the United States looking at a couple of breweries here and there, and we flew to Colorado to buy a brewery that had evolved to a much bigger, more sophisticated brewing system. And Thane and I went and looked at it, and he said, I wouldn't hit a dead dog in the ass with this equipment. And I said, well, Thane, we just flew all the way out here, rent a car and hotels. And I said, you got to be kidding me. He goes, no, if you want to make beer, you need an excellent product, excellent equipment. So we went out and had a few drinks, and then I said, why don't we keep going? I mean, we blew this, but let's keep going. So we flew to California, and we saw a couple of breweries, and we're flying back over the Rockies. And he said, you know what, why don't we build our own brewery? I said, well, but Thane, you're the brewmaster, you're not an engineer. And he said, no, but the guy that ran our whole plant, Charlie Price, is also retired. Let's bring him in. So we did. So here we had two gentlemen with 30 or 40 years experience each, sitting at a table deciding what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And if it hadn't been for those two gentlemen, who knows if we would have ever gotten it off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like some people might call that luck. I would call that fate.
Okay.
You know? And of being able to get those collective minds in together and also agreeing upon it, and with you guys, with the business sense, with the marketing, with the drive, and being able to really bring it up. I mean that just doesn't happen by happenstance.
Yeah, and the fact that they were such great brewers and engineers, they're all such great people. And they brought to our culture that sense of camaraderie and esprit de corps with all the members of the staff, and we benefited greatly with their wisdom.
Sure. And the first beer that you guys brewed was Dortmunder, correct? But back in the day, it was Heisman beer, right?
It was called the Heisman because first it's a German name, and it was a German lager that we were brewing, but also Heisman was born around the corner from the brewery. And his dad happened to be a cooper, which means a person that made barrels, and presumably a lot of beer barrels because
Interesting.
Of the 30 breweries, yeah.
Wow.
So we did that, and then the Downtown Athletic Club of New York sent us a cease and desist letter saying we own the right to the name. We give out the Heisman Trophy every year, and we walked away from the name. And then years later, we found out that we could have kept the name.
Oh,
but
really?
by then, the name the horse had left the barn. It would have been too late to rename it Heisman again.
Sure. So, but what was the legal moves that allowed them that you could have kept it?
Well, they said we own the name, and but when we were raised in Rocky River, there was a company called Ford's men's clothing store. Ford Motor Company couldn't prevent them from using that name.
Sure.
They could have prevent Ford's clothing from using the script Ford name.
Yeah.
But the name itself was out there. But our attorneys had said no, they're wrong. You could have kept the name because they own the name as it relates to intercollegiate sports excellence in football, period. And so that was the rationale and how we could have kept the name. But, Dortmunder is Dortmunder. Or we had a contest because one year, because people used to butcher the name, and the award went to the person who came up with the name, the Don't Minder.
Absolutely, but I think Dortmunder has worked out pretty well for you because 1990 you guys win the gold medal at the
Great American Brew Festival.
Great American Brew Festival. I mean, 2 years in, were you guys just floored to win that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. In fact, we weren't even there. It was taking place in Colorado, but we got word from a voicemail saying that we were just won this award. The thing we really liked about that style was if you try a Dortmunder style, the city of Dortmund is somewhere in the middle of the country, so the Munich beers are more malty, the Hamburg beers are more dry, and so Dortmunder was a nice balance. It starts off with a nice malt beginning and then a slight dry finish, so it's got that very nice balance to it, and that's why it appealed to so many people.
Oh, so that's where the name came from.
Right?
Interesting. Look at you. And another beer with a great history that I don't know a lot of people know is the Conway Irish Ale, after your grandfather, correct?
Yeah, Patrick Conway.
Yeah.
He directed.
It's a pretty good name, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a great name. He directed traffic a couple blocks north of the brewery on the corner of West 25th and Detroit, and he stood in the middle of the street with a semaphore that would go stop, go. You still see them in certain parts of Asia to this day. But as people would come by over Christmas, my dad said they would hand him whiskey and cigars and chocolates, and he said he would be surrounded with gifts in the middle of the street. And he said he was so beloved and he was part of the fabric of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And now you just go through an intersection, and the lights conduct the flow. But back then, he was a person that was part of the neighborhood and was beloved. And so we thought, if we're going to have an Irish ale, why not Conway's Irish Ale, and then have a picture of himself on the label.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, it has the go right there where you can see the traffic sign, because you look at that for someone who doesn't know, you're like, oh, that's kind of a cool label, but not really knowing the history of that. What do you think that would mean to your grandfather, knowing that since he was so, he sounded like the man, by the way. If people are bringing him whiskey and beer and flowers and chocolate or whatever cigars. I mean, you got to be the man to do that. I mean, he must have been knowing that a beer, and let alone a great Irish ale with a great strong name like Patrick Conway. He must have been. He would be floored, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. And he liked a pint, and he liked his whiskey as well. But he was from County Mayo, Ireland, and like all our relatives, they're all around Clubay, which is right facing the Atlantic Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And our grandmother, if you go to Ireland today and you see the beauty there, she said, but you can't eat beauty. And when you had the famine, a million people died of starvation. I mean, it was a horrific time to be in Ireland back in the 1850s, 1860s. But he and all my other relatives came around the early part of the 20th century, like 1910.
Yeah.
So they weren't part of the first flow of immigrants because of the famine.
And they came right here to Cleveland?
Came right to Cleveland, just like the German population came to Cleveland for the industry, and then industry meant income, and then also it meant bringing back a lot of their cultural attributes, and one of them, like I said earlier, was lager beer.
Sure.
The Germans, that was a huge part of their culture. And they were outraged when Prohibition put an end to the production of beer and spirits, because the beer was so important to them as a group.
Yeah, and not even just as a drinking aspect, but also a culture. Like, cultures were surrounded by beer and the collection of people around beer.
Well, breweries used to be as an important part of a city's fabric, like its politics, its sports, its newspapers. They're breweries, and people were proud of the beer of their community. In fact, Thane said that as a younger brewer, they would travel around the country for conferences, and he always would look forward to trying that local beer.
Sure.
But that all pretty much went away when the bigs came in and would undercut local breweries with their pricing and with big marketing initiatives. The little breweries just couldn't keep up with it and folded. And
Yeah.
that's why Cleveland lost all their breweries.
And what is it like for you, started in 1988, now we're in 2024, and now not only does every city around here, but there's multiple breweries, multiple brew pubs, micro brews, whatever you want to say, here in, not just in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, but Ohio as a whole, but then across the nation. And what is it like to be able to bring some of that tradition back here to the United States and have it live on?
Well, it's enormously important to the city of Cleveland because of the taxes that are paid and the jobs that we've created. Over the 36, we're on our 36th year, we've produced thousands of jobs. And people are coming and going all the time. In fact, we're one of the few places that really have a great track record of longevity. We just awarded the Conway's Award at our summit last week to two people who both have worked for us for 30 years each.
Wow.
That's 60 years.
That's amazing.
And we applauded their longevity with us, but also for being such great staff that our customer base really appreciates. If you have a brew pub and you have excellent beer, that's just part of the equation. You got to have a strong food concept, and you have to have strong service.
Yeah.
And that could really make or break you. So if you're going to go into the brew pub business and you think it's going to be beer alone, you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, there's so many different components, and you guys have been able to capitalize and excel on so many of them. I think a lot of it has to do just with what you're rooted in, and that is Cleveland. You set up shop in a undesirable neighborhood in Cleveland, have helped build up that neighborhood into one of the most desirable in Northeast Ohio. How important is Cleveland and the love of Cleveland and the loyalty to Cleveland and the importance of the background of Great Lakes?
Oh, it's huge. We've been courted to go into other cities over the years, whether it's the Carolinas, Detroit, Chicago, and we've decided to stay in Cleveland and have our address in Cleveland and be part of the fabric of this great Midwest town. And there's so much history in Cleveland that most people aren't aware of. That what a remarkable achievement to have this city bloom. After Lorenzo Carter arrived in 1802, by the 1850s and 1860s, we had 100,000 people. We would be a huge manufacturing center. We supplied a lot of the weaponry for the war effort of the Civil War because the South isn't going to participate in that.
Yeah.
And I think that the canals that were built that connected Lake Erie to the Hudson River, which connected to New York City, so Cleveland was then shipping things to the New York and then also to Europe. But then there was another canal, the Ohio Erie Canal, to connect to Cleveland to the Ohio River, which connected to Cincinnati and St. Louis and New Orleans. So that opened up the interior, and so Cleveland became this great industrial center that was supplying products to a lot of different states around the East Coast primarily. What was also important was water. We had the Lake Erie, we had Cuyahoga River, and most of beer is water. And if you don't have an easy supply of product, then you're in trouble. In fact, a lot of breweries out west are going to be struggling with a lack of water.
Sure.
It takes 4, 5, 6 barrels of water to make a barrel of beer. And so one of the initiatives we're working on is trying to work on water conservation because it's so important for our product and for the culture itself.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. You guys have really now. Back in the day, it was you had a few beers and things like that, and they kept a pretty steady eddy of stay in the lines of the description of the style of beer. Where now it's everywhere. Chocolate beers and all this crap. But you guys have really done a good job of keeping tradition, but also pushing a little bit into the progression. How important has that been over the past, it seems like the past 5-6 years is when that has been really important to be able to, for a brewery to experiment a little bit?
Well, before I answer that question, one other thing I meant when we were just talking about water. We had the Burning River Fest for years that would raise money that would be doled out to groups that work in the area of water quality and sustainability. But then COVID hit, and so it's been dark for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's too bad because it raised close to $1 million that these monies were given out to needy organizations in the area of water quality. But the other thing that was so important about water for the Cleveland breweries was because when the lake used to freeze over, Cleveland breweries used to harvest all that ice, and when you were making lager beers, you need to age and ferment and age at cooler temperatures, so that ice was a godsend for breweries so that they could harvest it and then put it in subterranean areas below the brewery to keep it cool, and then utilize that cool temperatures to produce all year round. Whereas if you were from the interior of the country and you're away from a lake where you could harvest all this ice, you had to stop brewing in the summers. It was just too hot.
Yeah.
So they had a competitive advantage.
So it was really like a perfect place to come brew beer.
Yeah, and so Cleveland breweries had a competitive advantage over other breweries that were in the interior, but then artificial refrigeration came out in the 1870s.
Yeah.
Cleveland lost that competitive advantage because now all breweries could brew all year round.
Yeah.
So.
Freaking technology. I'll tell you what. Man, just ruining it for everyone. Speaking of Burning River Fest, when is it coming back? I have never been to a Burning River Fest.
Well,
I understand why you guys.
We were trying to meet payroll, and we actually had a philanthropic arm of the company that had to come to an end because we had to take care of our payroll first, and so the Burning River Fest has been shelved again this summer, and so hopefully next summer we can bring it back and hit our stride again and help the organizations that need those funds.
Yeah, love it.
Get back to your question then about, what was it about innovation?
Yeah, how important has it been for you guys to stick with tradition, but while also pushing the boundaries a little bit in some beers and some aspects? Well,
yeah, the whole culture in beer land is in upheaval these days, and a lot of breweries are consolidating. Some are being purchased by Asian and European brewers. Some are going out of business, and there's an enormous amount of innovation going on even beyond beer. There's the hottest category right now are India Pale Ales, double India Pale Ales, and very strong and very hoppy. But also there's the teas and the seltzers and the cannabis and the THCs and the ready-to-drink products. And so the whole culture is in this upheaval of, what's new and what's next, but it's also exhausting.
Yeah.
And not just for brewers and our own staff that's continually wanting to innovate, because we were a little sleepy at the switch on the innovation front, and so our sales and marketing team have done a good job of now reintroducing some interesting beers. But the whole importance of innovation has never been more strong than it is today. And our staff is saying, well, okay, what does our customer base want now?
Yeah.
A couple of months ago it was this, now it's this, and what's going to be a flash in the pan, what's got legs and it's going to continue, and no one has a crystal ball.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, because every time you brew a new beer, there's marketing behind it, there's money behind it, there's willpower behind it, and it's trying to be able to see what is going to be the flash in the pan, what's just the hot flavor of the month or whatever it may be. But yeah, you guys have continued to have the traditional ones, and then over the past probably 5 years have gotten a little bit more experimental, which I think people love. The Vivacious beer that you guys just came out with will land you on your butt.
Right.
Oh my
right.
gosh,
Yeah.
it is delicious. You cap it at 1.
Yeah, right.
It's like 9.5%, 10%, something like that.
Well, actually, it is somewhat reminiscent of the Christmas ale in the sense that it's stronger than it tastes.
Yes, definitely.
But
Sneaky strong.
right?
Yeah. What can we look forward to as we're wrapping up here? What can we look forward to in the future with Great Lakes? What's kind of your vision for the company?
Well, we have the current brewery in Ohio City and our restaurant in Ohio City, but our brewery was actually the stables of the old Schlother Brewing Company.
Yeah.
And it's a 106-year-old building, and it's really long in the tooth, and it's hurting our efficiencies. And so we're looking to build a new brewery and with newer equipment and state-of-the-art equipment, but it's an enormously costly undertaking, and banks aren't lending money these days, and it's the inflation and interest rates are high. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's not the perfect time to be doing this. So
Sure.
My brother Dan, myself, and our top management team are glacially going through the exercise of trying to figure out where to do it and how to do it and how to fund it, and it's been a very, very time-consuming effort.
Sure.
But we'd like to stay in the area and be part of Cleveland's renaissance.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I was going to ask is, do you envision this continuing to be in Ohio City? Obviously, that area where you are at currently is limited. There's not a lot of land available, but how much are you stressing to continue to keep that in the city lines of Cleveland? Do you ever see yourself going to like a Strongsville or Avon? Or
Well, there's outside suburban areas that are courting the business, and our own city fathers are courting our business as well. So that exercise is unfolding as we speak.
Yeah.
And will be interesting to see how it shakes out. But our heart is in Cleveland. We love the idea of an outdoor retail experience like the German beer gardens. Not that will necessarily bring back archery and bowling and literary clubs and things like that, but just to have a couple acres outside would be really a godsend for our company, because our banquet manager, Shannon, has said that, boy, we walk away from a lot of business because some people would say, I need this wedding, but it has to be outside.
Yeah.
And in our neighborhood in Ohio City, you can't do that.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. I got 2 quick hitters for you. Maybe I'll come up with a third, but these are the ones that I wrote down. On your deathbed, hopefully that's not for a long, long time, what would be your last beer? You could only have one more beer. See, this is also a different question. This is not the beer that you could only drink for the rest of your life. This is the last beer you would ever have.
What if it's a beer that's not in season?
That's fine. Yeah, it's a hypothetical question, so you can make hypothetical rules for yourself.
Conway's Irish Ale.
Conway's Irish. Would you say that's your favorite?
It is one of my favorites, if not the favorite. It's a terrific product.
It really is.
And it'll be available for the St. Patrick's Day, where we're not just celebrating St. Patrick's Day on Sunday, but Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we have traditional Celtic music on all 3 days, and Friday is, and Saturday and Sunday will be music well, the Sunday is going to be music up till 2 o'clock because the parade starts at 2. Then we also, and this has been going on for over 20 years, we do a party for St. Coleman Church down the street. It's the parish from where our parents were raised, pretty much all Irish, and they're struggling. And so we donate the beer and the food, and then we charge for it.
Yeah.
And it raises about 10 or 12,000 every year for the church, but it's they're in desperate need of many more dollars than that, but we can do what we can.
Yeah.
And it's more of a family gathering, so if folks want to help the church and then also have family involved, we have the pipers who are going to come, and then we also have Irish dancers, and then Conway's Irish Ale, and then a new beer that we just made. It's a stout that's got dillisk in it, and dillisk is Irish seaweed, and our grandmother from Ireland used to chew on it, and it was real salty,
Yeah.
and it reminded her of Ireland.
That's funny.
And so we took the dillisk, and Steve Foreman, our pub brewer, made a stout with the dillisk in it, and we'll be serving that on St. Patrick's Day.
Similar to like what a Guinness would probably be?
A Guinness, but with more of a salty essence to it. We've done these stouts before with oysters,
Yeah.
with the brine, but this time it's the dillisk, which is the Irish seaweed, and paying homage to our grandmother.
Love it. Interesting. I'm intrigued on that. That'll be great. Final question: who in history would you like to have a beer with?
Well, a president who was a former brewer, Thomas Jefferson.
He was a former brewer.
Yeah, and George Washington. In fact, on President's Day a couple years ago, we made one of Tom Jefferson's ales, and then we also made one of George Washington's beers.
How were they?
Great. You
Yeah?
know, they were lighter in body, but they're remarkable.
Huh. Interesting. The President's Day beer coming to Great Lakes very soon. Looking for Pat, anything else you want to get off your chest here?
No, this has been great.
Thank you so much for your time. This has really been, you're just a wealth of knowledge, both with business, but also history, Cleveland history of beer. So I always love getting the opportunity to hang out with you and pick your brain a little bit.
Well, with that COVID-19, and it was a rough period there, and we're still not recovered completely from it financially. But I think the resilience of our company is based on the fact that we hire great people.
Yeah.
And so hats off to our staff.
And also led by great people as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
there it is.
I'll throw that out there for you. Pat Conway, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you, buddy.